York for like Worldcons?
I've been in New York. I've been living in the Village in the early '70s, so I was no stranger to New York. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And then got back out to.
Now I went back out to. I got a script assignment. I said, well, I'll go back to LA and do some work there for a while.
What was the script assignment?
I don't remember. It was a film that never got made. So.
Oh, it was film. Okay,
Yeah.
not a series. Not
Yeah.
a series. Well, I know that, you know, I don't know if they told you, but it's a Comic-Con, but it's probably a Trek audience, but I want to make sure and get to all you, because I know everybody in this room should know, this man is more than the sum of his tribbles. All right, he has many things, but I want to do a little bit of history and some of your books, the making of The Trouble with Tribbles and the world of Star Trek, which were like the 2 and 3. I finally had you on my '70s editions. I had you on.
They were the first books written about television production by someone who was actually in the room. So that there's a lot of books about the making of this or the making of that. They're done after the fact by somebody who does a few interviews and, you know, whatever anyone wants to say. I was actually there and witnessing and, you know, talked to as many of the people as possible, all of the actors. And so it's a much more personal and intimate look at the enthusiasm that everybody had for we knew we were doing something special. We didn't know that we'd still be talking about it 50 years later.
Well, I'm thankful that you're here. I'm glad for all the folks I've been able to meet from the original series that are talking about it 50 years later. And there's one person in particular, and I know you've written about him, and I want to get to your stuff, but while I've got the chance with you and for this audience, I want to ask you, even though you've written a lot about Gene Kuhn, but just, so we got a chance here to do it live and kind of personable. You sent your story, you did your pitch ideas.
Gene Kuhn was from Beatrice, Nebraska, and they just did a special tribute to him last year. And Dorothy Fontana couldn't make it, so I went. And we talked about our experience. Well, I talked about my experience working for him, and essentially, he was about as good a producer as you would ever want to work with. But I had sent in an outline shortly after the show premiered. And he said, we can't use this outline, we're all bought up. But he called me in, he said, I want to meet you. And I went in, and he said, we can't use this outline, we're all bought up.
And you were how old, 12?
7.
Okay.
So, but ambitious.
Oh, yeah.
And he says, but if we're renewed for a second season, please submit some stories. And I submitted 3 terrible outlines, 1 workable outline, and 1 that he had actually said, oh, that sounds kind of expensive when I kind of mentioned it that first meeting. He said, that sounds kind of expensive, but I said, I wasn't willing to give it up because I just knew it was a good idea. It was that rabbits in Australia got out of control. And I thought, what would happen if that happened on a space station, right? And so I came up with the idea, we can't use real animals, but we'll use little fluff balls like you see on keychains, and that'll work. And Dorothy Fontana read it and said, this has whimsy, and passed it on to Gene. Gene looked at it and said, yeah, I remember this kid, let's buy this story. And Dorothy said, let's give it to a real writer. And Gene said, no, I have a little faith in this guy, let's give him a chance. And so he says, I can't assign a writer because you don't have any credentials yet. But I won't assign anyone for a couple of weeks, and let's see what you can do if you were to submit a script. I can't ask you to submit a spec script, but, you know, it was very, you know, you're watching the union rules very carefully. And I came back something like 6 days later with a script that was a little on the long side, but we fixed it. And the more we trimmed and cut and realized this works, this doesn't work. And, hey, how about if the Tribbles react badly to the Klingons? And so, you know, and it all fell together. And, you know, I did not expect that it was going to be the very best episode, but I was determined to write the very best episode I could. And the night it was aired, I had a lot of friends over, and they were very happy with it. And I said, yeah, but come on, it's only 1 episode, 1 TV series. In 20 years, no one's going to remember it. David, I heard that. Challenge accepted. And I did not expect that Star Trek was going to become iconic. I only write science fiction. I don't predict the future. And some of you got that, thank you. And
well, media has certainly got science fictional.
yeah, I wake up every day amazed at the life I have had, because that one episode opened up so many doors, and I have been able to travel all over the world and meet people all over the world. You know, and Bill Nye, the science guy, and Neil deGrasse Tyson both asked for my autograph. Several astronauts have asked for my autograph. Are you kidding me? But the best of all is Dr. Kjell Lundgren spent 6 months on the International Space Station. He took a Tribble with him. And when he came back, he gave it to me. So I have a Tribble that went to space.
And survived.
And survived.
No quadrilateral orbit.
Houston, we have a Tribble on the space station.
Don't feed it. Jim, I have an idea. Can you hand me your Tribbles?
This one?
Yes.
Yeah. We reprinted the books for 50th anniversary edition. We have a few left. They're down in the dealer's room. So if you haven't read the books.
With Tribbleations.
But the one I brag about is The Martian Child. In 1992, I adopted a little boy. And that was kind of, unusual single dad. Because they're looking for Ward and June Cleaver, right? And who shows up, but, I don't know. I can't think of a good Batman, I guess. So anyway, but I proved to the state of California I could be trusted around children. And my son is 35 now. He turned out great. But when he was little, I wrote a story called The Martian Child, which ended up winning a Hugo and a Nebula and a bunch of other awards. And they made a movie starring John Cusack. But I have the novel version, and it's mostly true. It's just one of my favorite stories because it reminds me how much I love my kid. We both survived his teenage years, partly because I couldn't figure out how to dispose of the body. But, how many of you have kids? You know what I'm talking about. They're so cute. You sneak in while they're asleep. Oh, you're holding the pillow with both hands and one more day.
What's that? Yeah. Now look, you breeze through that. We're not going to relapse the whole thing, but if you, yes, I know this is shocking. There was a time when you had Stephen Poe's Making of Star Trek, and then you may have had B. Joe's Concordance, and then down the line, Franz Joseph Schnabel did his blueprints. With the tech manual, the blueprints.
Oh my God.
But this was like about the 4th Star Trek thing of any depth and detail you could buy. And then, you did the world first, right?
Well, what happened was I was going to do just the Tribbles book. And I sat down and started writing. There was so much to tell and so much to tell. I called Betty Ballantyne, who had already said she was going to buy the books. I said, there's too much material. Can I break it into 2 books? And she says, okay. And so this one is about Star Trek itself, and the other is about how the Trouble with Tribbles episode came to be, which it was a good pairing. It worked out very well. We sold a lot of copies, and I put some addresses in the back of the book where all the different fan clubs were sprouting up, and that helped create
the Well Committee back then.
Yeah, Well Committee and BJO and Lincoln Enterprise, a bunch of others, and it created an international network of Star Trek fans writing to each other that previously they would have had no way of finding each other. So this was before you could Google it, So.
Can I just say something real quick? How many in the audience right now have been a fan? What made you a Star Trek fan was the original series, either the 60s or, okay. And then how many, like, say, Next Generation made you a fan in your year? Yeah. And then I'll do real quick, DS9. Voyager. Enterprise.
Okay. You want to notice it's the original series.
Yeah. Well, it's a convention too. Just real quick, JJ movies, the Kelvins.
The Jar Jar movies.
And and then Discovery.
Did I say that out loud?
How many are here because of the Orville? Okay.
Oh, I love the Orville.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm just talking about so you guys, I don't have to say it, we don't have to say it so much, but there is so much great stuff recorded in here, but aside from how TV worked is also in here. If you love the Tribbles and you love Trek, that's here. But the other level is how TV works, how pitching, writing, come back next year when I've got budget, if we get, all of that. And Gene Kuhn is preserved in here. And
finally,
And just all the actors coming by and harping at you as you cut.
Oh, that was so much fun. Because I was hanging out on the set because I wanted to And frankly, hanging out on a set can be really boring because you're waiting and you're waiting and you're waiting, and then there's maybe 10 minutes of watching people work, and then there's waiting and waiting and waiting. Except when, when Bill is rehearsing, then it alternates between silly and serious, and Bill's a workaholic, and he knows, he's thinking about how is this going to play and what's going to cut, and you can hear these conversations back and forth with Mark Daniels, who directed all the Lucy episodes, and Jerry Finnerman, who's the greatest lighting guy in history, and they're having these conversations. Maybe we should have a shadow here, and watching them create every individual shot is a marvelous experience. But I was listening to how the actors spoke, because I'm very concerned with, I want the dialogue to work, and so you have to have, Scotty has a specific way of speaking, and Bill Shatner has a methodical way of bringing the sentence to life. I'm exaggerating, but and I think part of it is because he had to know 60 pages of dialogue a week, so maybe he was trying to remember, where does this line go? But I mean, come on, he was holding the series together. He was in every shot. He had to be there early every day and late, and he couldn't go home till they got what they needed. And I would listen, and Leonard Nimoy had a very specific way of speaking. So I wanted to get their voices in my head, so when I was typing their dialogue, how would this character say the line? Which I think is one of the reasons why there wasn't a lot of dialogue rewriting on the script, because I had caught the actors' voices. And I'm really proud of getting that one right.
Well, yeah, in a big way. What it doesn't get a lot of attention is, you made a big impression with that. I love the story also though about how you had the wrong font ball, and that's why it was long. Was because it was.
But actually, it's easier to cut. It's easier to cut. You say, oh, I can do without this. I'll shove these two sets together, and I can hire one less actor and build one less set. Stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah. But. Talk a little bit more about you. You're good in the book about talking about him being a mentor, but just as a person.
As a person, God, I want to slap those cigars out of his hand, because that's what killed him.
Cigarette.
He was with the cigars.
Cigarette, yeah.
And he was smoking like, he'd get out in the middle of the night to pee and light a cigarette. That he told Dorothy Fontana that one day his chest hurts, he goes in the hospital, he's dead 3 days later with lung cancer. We were so pissed at him. Because we loved him so much. This is a man who, he fought for the writers, he fought for the actors, he fought for the quality of the show. I was in his office one day, he was fighting with the NBC program standards guy, and literally he said to the guy with Stanley Robertson, he says, Stan, you're full of shit. This is, to NBC, right? Because he says, look, this, I don't even remember what it was, but you could hear him fighting for the quality of the show. And I as opposed to other producers I've known who, a note comes back and says, oh, we got to cut that. The network didn't like it. I said, oh, crap. It's so innocent. We can just, I was working on Land of the Lost, and I was a story editor. And we had a script where we had a Civil War veteran it was a minor and he had a gun. And he said, no, you can't have a gun in the script because kids might imitate it.
And this is Saturday morning.
This is Saturday morning. So, all right, fine. So I replaced him with a Civil War guy with a big, big cannon. And I got a note back. Thank you. You got it. I got a note back from Joe Terratera at NBC. I know what you did there. I said, can the kids imitate a big brass cannon? No. All right.
Increase the lever.
Yeah. I mean, come on. The whole point of writing is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. So.
Now, I had the chance to get to meet Andy Richardson, who was Gene's secretary.
Oh,
assistant.
Andy, yeah, Richardson.
She went through several.
God, she's in Australia now.
She is. She's been over once. I had her on Portal 47.
I missed her when she was over here.
I'd love to get her to Vegas
person.
As an eyewitness, because she also was an eyewitness to all the civil rights leaders.
She saw everything.
She's amazing.
Yeah, she's a person of color. That's the current terminology. And you would walk into the office, and if she sensed you had the right sense of humor, she'd say, "Hi, I'm Gene Coon." Oh God, no! And either you got it that she was, and because she was a no bullshit woman, and she was really good. And I mean, I wish you were here. I wish she had not gone to Australia so she could enjoy being here and tell us so much more about Gene.
Well, I got her back. We got her on camera a little bit, but she's done TED Talks and is on. She has YouTubes if you want to look for her. Her name now is Andrea Kindred.
Okay.
I think she's gone through several. But yeah, do you think? She said. So when I was talking to her, I said Gene was also like a writing machine.
Oh my God.
He would do like 4 days, and I asked her. I said, "How do you do that?" And she said, "Speed."
That's awesome.
But not like a junkie. Like, here's a tool I can use to. It was the '60s, but it was like the pre-hippie '60s.
The joke with Roddenberry was that he'd sit down with a bottle of scotch over here and a ream of paper over here in the morning, and at the end of the day, the ream was gone and the scotch was gone. You know, if you get that writing, because the first draft of Tribbles took 4 days. So if you are in the zone, it happens. I'm in the zone for about 15 minutes a day now, so, so I've slowed down a little, you know, but...
You're allowed. We're all allowed.
But I find that I can still write, you know, I'll write for like 3 hours in the morning, and then I go off and do stuff, and then I'm good for an hour of television a night. It takes me 3 nights to get through a movie, and then because I'll get up and start writing again, and sometimes till 1 in the morning, so... Yeah, but I don't write the way I used to. I would sit there and write for 8 hours straight. I don't do it that way anymore.
So when you have a good diatribe, or maybe you call it an editorial, like on Facebook, is that a break from your
That's
writing?
a break, yeah. It's actually just to warm up the writing muscles. I'm on Facebook. You can find me. But thank you.
He's on Facebook and
and Patreon. A lot of my stories, older stories, and a lot of new stories are showing up on Patreon. You can be a subscriber. You can read a lot of stuff for free, and I do occasionally post columns on Medium as well. So I'm all over the place. But you know, your head gets full, and you have to empty it sometimes, and so. You know, I try not to watch too much news because there's too much negativity. And Star Trek was never about being negative. It was about finding the positive, the healing, the recovery, the ambition. And so I believe that, you know, I was trained by Gene Coon and Roddenberry and Fontana and the cast as well. And so when I'm writing from the Star Trek vision of what insight can we take out of this event? Or what can we learn, or who can we be, or what's our ambition? So I'm not trying to avoid the negativity in everything I write, because we have enough negativity in the world. We need a little more of the original Star Trek vision of we can get past this and we can do better. And I'm determined never to lose sight of that, because that was, you know, that was life-changing for me.
Yeah. Now here's a corner that gets forgotten a lot. But original series after Tribbles was such a hit, and the process went down, and look, we took a chance on the kid, and the kid paid off. You did some rewrites, right? Didn't you work on some other scripts? Cloudminders?
They had some money left over after Tribbles because they could pay me basic, you know. So they actually had money left over in the budget, and they had a script they were having some troubles with called I'm Mud. And Gene Coon says, go read this. And I just went off and read it, and he says, look, we want to get down to the planet in 15 minutes, and every draft we've done, it takes 2 acts, it takes 30 minutes to get down to the planet. We got to get down there. And this is one of my favorite stories, because I said, well, look, you've established that this android is strong enough to just beat the crap out of everybody. So all the androids can just grab the crew and beam them down. But you don't have to show it. You just have to have one android walk in and say, we've completed beaming down the crew of the Enterprise. And Gene Coon's eyes went wide as he looked at me, and he says, you just solved with 1 line of dialogue what nobody around here has been able to solve in 2 weeks of arguments. Go rewrite this script to do that. Have some fun with the rest of the story. And I said, look, we've got these identical twins. We can get a pair of identical twins, and we'll mat them in so we can show 6, and we'll have the numbers on their chest that show. He says, why 500? And I said, why not? And he says, okay. Well, we allowed ourselves to get a little silly with that one because it was Harry Mudd. And Gene said, you want to send this to the Writers Guild for arbitration for possible screen credit? I said, hell no, this is Stephen Kendall's script. It's his story, and I'm not going to steal his credit or his residuals. That would not be ethical. Now, unfortunately, I'm in a minority. There are a lot of writers who will, ooh, script credit, I can make more in residuals. And they don't think in terms of respecting the original writer. And you know, that was not the way I was trained. I was trained by old school writers.
Yeah. Or helping a newbie who could use the money at the beginning, and then after he's written 500 scripts, maybe he'll do that.
Look, if you've got 30 scripts on a hit show, you're set for life because the residuals are now in perpetuity. So, you know, if you have a few scripts on any Star Trek series, you're not going to have to worry about money ever again. So if you're taking someone else's, you're jumping someone else's credit, that's just greed. There's no need for that, and it's not fair to the people whose credits you jump. And it's happened on some series. Thank you.
Was there another one besides I Nut? I was trying to think.
Yeah, I came back third season. I was supposed to do, Gene was there when he says, so we want to do a sequel to the Tribbles. And I had a couple ideas. And then he left the show because NBC wouldn't give him the time slot they promised. So I ended up working with Fred Freiberger. And Fred Freiberger and I did not hit it off well.
I was going to say, how did that go, dude?
His first words to me were, I screened Tribbles this morning, I didn't like it, Star Trek is not a comedy. This was not exactly I think, the best way to get into a good relationship with any writer. And, but I was determined, and so we weren't going to do a sequel to Tribbles then, but I had this other story called Castles in the Sky, and he said, well, I don't trust you to write this story, you're too young, I want you to take on a collaborator. And so Ollie Crawford and I worked together, and Ollie was a great old school writer and a landmark in the Writers Guild. And then he cut us off and handed the script assignment. We got paid for the story, but the script assignment was handed to Margaret Arman. And I was not particularly happy with the resolution because I wanted, at the end of it, the immediate problem had been acknowledged but not solved. And as they're leaving the planet,
we're talking about Cloud Miners.
Yeah, we're talking about my script for,
yes.
As they're leaving the planet, which is a haves versus have-not story. Kirk says something like, well, we've done it again, we helped the planet. And McCoy says it'll take generations, how many children are going to die in the meantime? Because I wanted a bit of a downer ending. It was like 1969, and I wanted people to realize change does not happen just because, you violated the Prime Directive and left. And Margaret Arman came in and said, well, if they all wear these little gas masks to protect them from the xenite gas, all the slaves can go back to work and be happy. And I was very unhappy with that ending because it did not address the economic inequality that the whole thing was a metaphor for. I was ambitious, partly because I was hanging out with Harlan Ellison and Gene Roddenberry and Gene L. Kuhn and a lot of other writers who essentially said, be ambitious. And I wanted to write stories that would make a big, big difference. I'm always surprised that Tribbles was the one, but it's okay. The fact that I've made possibly billions of people laugh, that's not bad either.
No.
And it still is an ecology story. It's about, yeah.
And the whole world knows that you once had a girlfriend named Holly Sherman.
Absolutely. In fact, Holly came to, I had a birthday in January. Holly was there. She made a wonderful taco casserole. And we are still close friends. And she actually proposed to me about 5 years ago, and I said, you had your chance, lady. I proposed to her in college, and she said, no, I don't think so. And you went, So, she had her chance, and that was it. But
kind of moving along forward in time, the great thing about World of Star Trek was you also, by the 70s, and everybody had been watching reruns after school for, 5 years, 6 years by then, with a critique. Some of the tropes, now we would say the tropes of the original series, oh, the transporter breaks down every week, who would trust that? And does your captain really leave? A modern naval captain does not go ashore first with everything.
Yeah.
And I soaked this up, and not everybody did this. In fact, I may be the only person. When I wrote The Next Generation Companion, I actually had footnotes because I was fresh out of grad school. And I actually said, as David Gerrold pointed out in the, so some of the things.
I never saw that one.
I will show you. I'll show you.
Yeah.
No, I did. I said, as you pointed out in the Captain, technology breakdown, yada yada, and pointed that out, going into, as you all sat down those early weeks to start remaking the new Star Trek in '86.
I wrote the writer-director's guide for Next Generation. I came in, I was hired almost the day it was announced, and Gene said, I need you to write the Bible, because I had so much.
October 1986.
October 20th I started.
Everybody thinks about Next Generation's birthday being September 1987,
well,
but you're working.
Yeah, it was supposed to be announced at the 20th anniversary party, but they hadn't finished the contract, so it took them another month to get the contract signed, and there's quite some stories behind that, which we don't have time for. But Gene put me to work immediately, and he says, I need you to write the Bible. As soon as we could even get into offices, and he says, I want you to write the Bible. And so I would go in every day, and we would meet for a half hour and talk about it, and I'd say, we could do this. And he'd say, that's good, why don't you go write that? So I was suggested a lot of stuff that he picked up on. I said, well, the captain should not beam down, because instead we'll have the first officer be the action hero, and the captain will be the philosophical, ideological hero. And Gene liked that, and because it gave us a larger cast and an extra hero. So, which is why Riker got all the action stuff, or most of it. I had a wonderful chat with Jonathan Frakes about a month ago, and we just had a great time just sharing stories and how the character was conceived and all the fun stuff he got to do and the stuff he didn't get to do. And he's really a great guy. So if you ever get a chance to see Jonathan Frakes, I highly recommend it. He's a very, very skilled director. He knows his stuff, and that's what I really like about him.
The amazing thing is, as you think about it, Jonathan Frakes is the only human being alive who has worked on Discovery and the Orville.
Yes. Yeah, we were talking about that. I told him I want to visit the Orville set next time he's directing. So, my agent was telling us, Dorothy and I had the same agent. He's saying Seth MacFarlane wants a meeting with you guys, but he could never get it set up. Now we know what he wanted a meeting for, but we never got the meeting because we could never get it set up. But I might have actually had a chance to work on the Orville. That would have been fun.
You said like past tense.
Well, I'm sure
they're
I know
going
they've been around for years. I told my agent, call him up and tell him I want to do the man-eating Tribbles story.
The homage of whatever that turns out to be.
Yeah.
Well, we kind of jumped over it, and I know, hopefully now with the years going by, I know Next Generation for you started off with such promise and such high hopes. And the little think tank that you were in on the ground floor of, and then it turned very sour.
We had so much fun until Gene Roddenberry's lawyer showed up. And what was happening is, Bob Justman and I loved Bob. I admired him so much. I mean, and we didn't always see eye to eye. But there was a lot of respect, even when we disagreed. And we were having a lot of fun. And the studio was reading all the memos. And so they would go to Gene and say, David's doing such a great job, make sure you keep him happy and give him more authority to do this, because we really have a treasure there. And once the lawyer was there, every time the studio would say, the studio execs were they would say, David's doing a great job, the lawyer would hear, they're going to take the show away from us and give it to David, which is stupid, because all I wanted to do was make the best show possible so Gene could finally enjoy being the hero of Star Trek, which had been taken away from him on the original show. And so I would go in and they'd bawl me out. The lawyer would would tell Gene, you can't let David have too much authority or too much power. And the lawyer started hiring other people and putting them in as major producers, and I kept getting moved down and down. I was supposed to be a producer. He kept moving me down and down and down the food chain until I wasn't even a story editor, just a consultant. So, well, pardon my English, but fuck that. That was not what I was promised. And Gene had promised in public that we would do a story with gay characters because the fans had asked for it. He'd announced it in a meeting, and Rick Berman had written a memo saying, here's a 3-page memo, here's all the issue stories we could do. And he had one about AIDS. Now, because Heinlein had been very big on blood donorship, and I had promised Robert that because Robert Heinlein was a friend of mine, I said, I'm gonna do a story about blood donorship. And I had a story where we ran out of artificial blood, and we had to, have crew of the Enterprise donate blood. And the goal was to put a card at the end, you can donate blood too. We had a critical blood shortage because people were even afraid to donate blood because of the AIDS crisis. So I had this really good script, I think, really good dilemma called Blood and Fire. And it was supposed to be the 3rd or 4th episode. And I was working on the teleplay, I realized, oh, these 2 characters might be in a relationship. And there's 4 lines of dialogue where Riker says to one of the characters, so how long have you 2 been together? And the other says, since the academy. That was it, right? If you were like under 12, oh, they're good friends. But this would keep Gene's promise, and well, Rick Berman and a few other people hit the ceiling. And so, oh, we can't put gay characters in this show because even after all the promises and the meetings and the memos, we can't have gay characters because mommies will write letters. And I wrote a memo that said, if not here, where? If not, Gene made a promise, if not here, where? If not now, when? And also, Star Trek should be the leader on these issues, not the follower. And Herb Wright, who was the producer I was working for, stuck his head in my office and said, great memo, you still got to change the script. And so we went through like 3 or 4 rewrites, and it never got any better. And finally Bob Justman wrote a memo that said, what are we, a bunch of pussies? Let's go back to the first draft. That was a good draft. And my contract was supposed to either get renewed or expire in June, and I was getting sick from the emotional stress because I realized there is a level of hypocrisy in this office I can no longer deal with. And because, one of my heroes, one of my mentors was Harlan Ellison, and it's like the story is king. And by the way, Harlan was a character reference for me when I adopted my little boy. So, and he was like my big brother, and I knew sides of him that most people never saw, and he was a hero. So I was asking myself, what would Harlan do? And I said, well, after he would have kicked down all the walls of all the buildings on the lot. So I just went to Gene and I said, just don't renew my contract. I have another deal pending, which I did. I had been offered another deal which would put money in my pocket. I knew it wasn't going to go very far, but at least it gave me an out. And so I left. And then I found out that some of the people in the offices were saying I'd been fired. So my agent said, I'm having trouble getting you into offices. He said, what did you do? I walked in with a stack of memos and scripts, and he says, okay, I'm taking this to the Writers Guild. And the Writers Guild went and filed a grievance on my behalf and Dorothy Fontana's behalf that we had been doing producer-level work, but we're not being given the wages or the credits. And so this made me Gene's enemy for life. The funny thing is in 1990, I sent Gene a note saying, I still remember all the good times we had. And I blame Gene's lawyer, not Gene. And
you can say Leonard Nemecek now.
No, I don't even want that.
Okay.
Even the words make my gorge boil like a cork released to 30 fathoms. It's blech. Then even the name is disgusting.
I don't want to stop you, but has everybody seen Chaos on the Bridge? Bill did a documentary. All this finally came out.
No, that is the tip of the iceberg.
Well,
it was far worse.
I didn't mean to say, but I mean that tip had been like never heard of, never seen until.
So, but I sent Gene a note saying, look, I remember all the good times, and that's what I'm going to remember. Because I knew he was dying. I knew we were going to lose him soon. And Gene totally misunderstood. He thought I was trying to get you back on the show. I said, I don't want to go back on Star Trek. I'm not crazy about the direction that it went. I want to do the stories we were doing in the original series. And nobody's doing that, at least not till the Orville. But Gene misunderstood that. But it was okay. As far as I was concerned, You know, Gene was a hero to me for 20 years, and I'm not going to let that god-awful lawyer spoil 20 years because we had a bad experience for a while on Next Gen.
Well, he got his karmic comeuppance eventually.
Well, they could not, when they were shooting Chaos on the Bridge, they could not find any pictures of him. He was not he was a walking elbow wrinkle. He was just, you know, the Vogons and Hitchhikers, yeah, he scared them. All right, yeah. Let's talk about something more. I'm sorry, that was just...
No, that was, thank you, that was priceless. But so a lot of your ideas wound up being in the roots of Next Gen. Are there any things you threw out that you know, there was a lot of stuff, not all of it could be from you and Dorothy and, I mean, it was just you and Dorothy and Bob Justman and Eddie Milkus, who was really not contributing that
Eddie
way.
left real early. Once Leonard Maisel showed up, Eddie left immediately, and boy, he was the first rat off the ship. And I'm sorry, we should. Eddie's leaving? Why? All right.
But I mean, there were only that few of you.
Yeah.
So what are some of the many, and there's a lot of your memos survived, a lot of Bob's survived.
I'm actually
of your ideas, I was going to ask you, of all your ideas you threw in, and at the time you went, okay, well, we can't do everything. Is there anything looking back off the top of your head that you really wish had survived?
The one I would have loved to have done is Joanna Russ wrote a story called When It Changed, which won the Hugo. Bob Justman had suggested, let's do the Planet of Amazon Women. And after we repatched the hole in the wall where I'd been banging my head, because that is such, you know, God damn it, everybody does that story and it's stupid. I said, no, if we're going to do a story about an all-female society, let's go to Joanna Russ's Hugo-winning story, When It Changed, which is a much, much better exposition of that trope. Because the men would be seen as not only as aliens, but alien invaders who, you know, do not understand that women have their own culture and their own society. And there's a great line in Joanna Russ's story. I mean, it resonates in my brain. And I read that story when it was first published, where the narrator, this woman who is meeting the men off this starship, is saying, not with my daughter, you don't. And so, oh my God, I had never realized what, you know, I mean, it was a game changer for me to read that story. I said, boy, imagine if we could do that story as a Star Trek episode, we would really rattle some cages. Of course, I knew we'd never get it past Gene. I mean, as much as Gene liked to pretend to be the great liberal, he had some blind spots. So.
Are we good for doing questions? Did they do questions with Bill?
Yeah, we can take a couple questions. Who's got a question? Make it a good one. Yeah, what's your question?
Did you have any input into Trial and Tribbleations?
Oh, yeah.
No, I did not. Every time I heard a rumor, I'd call, and Rick Berman would say, we're not doing anything, David. We'll call you if we're doing something. And one time I called him, and he said, no, we'll call you. And I said, well, what do you want me to tell the reporter from the New York Times who's calling me back in a half hour for a comment on Trials and Tribbleations, the episode you start shooting next week? And there's this long pause. He says, what do you want, David? Now, see, he had been given very strict instructions from Gene. I was never to be allowed near the set again. And I said, well, you know, I wouldn't mind being an extra on the show and a couple other little things. He said, oh, that can be arranged. And he wasn't happy about it, but they put me in a red shirt.
You were the most senior red shirt ever.
Yeah, it was the red shirt who survived for 20, 30 years. So anyway, yeah. So.
Who brought his own Tribble to the set?
Yeah, and I brought a Tribble from the original episode, and we put it in a shot. So I had a Tribble that had been both episodes. And at one point, I did auction it off to somebody many years later because we're in the process of downsizing. I said, I don't need this, but some fan will have fun with it. And but we had a lot of fun. And the director, Jonathan West, is just a super guy. He was, oh, this happened. You'll love this story. They had a videotape. This was back in the days of VHS. And they had a videotape, the original episode, and they're looking for a specific scene because they have to match it. And it's like when they're all, when the guys are coming out of where the guys have just been balled out for the fight. And they have to match the cut, and so they're looking for the scene, and here's the prop guys and the director and half the cast and all of the technical people and the lighting guys and the set, and they're watching this and they're fast forwarding through the tape, and I said, and I'm watching from a distance, I said, you're going the wrong way, it's before that, and they all turned around and looked at me, you know, who's this extra? And Jonathan West says, well, if anyone would know, David would, he wrote it. And they looked at me again, and all of a sudden I was like, oh, is that who you are and why you're here? So it was cool, and but you know, they were having fun redoing, you know, going back to the original Trek, and I think it was one of their greatest episodes, yeah.
There was also a crewman for the director who was Chinese. I think that they did that because NBC said, we don't want any Chinese crewmen. I think they did that on Trials and Tribulations to say that there were Chinese crewmen out there.
I had never heard that story before, but yeah, I guess so. We tried on the original show to be as diverse as it was possible to be in the 60s. By the time you get to Deep Space Nine, it was more taken for granted that you were going to be as diverse as possible. So, but even so, there was, Rick Berman did not want gay people on Star Trek, and so by the time you get a gay character on Discover, I mean, everybody else has already done it, and Star Trek was not the first, they were the last, and I consider that embarrassing. You had your hand up for a question.
Oh yeah, so this is kind of just about your development as a writer throughout your life. So you were pretty young when you wrote Tribbles, but I'm wondering if you can remember far back, or even more recently, the plot that you found.
Yes, I'm old. Cut me in half and count the rings, okay?
the plot of the, like, when you've written many, many, many stories, a plot that you were the least happy with of all the stories you've ever written, or at least more recently.
That was then produced, or no, just didn't go anywhere.
Just a story, just writing.
Well, I've always wanted, you know, the More Tribbles, More Troubles episode. I always thought, it should have been better, and yet every time I go back and look at the episode, I say, you know, that turned out better than I remember. So it's hard to judge.
Yeah. And I'm plugging your books for you. You've got 3 or 4 of your pitches in here.
Yes, yeah.
Bandy and the
Bandy has been stolen by more writers. It's shown up on Real Ghostbusters, and
that'll teach
there
you
was
to
a comic book. I'm not going to name the writers who stole it, but they should have known better. Yes, sir, you had.
Speaking of adaptations, given the opportunity, basically Disney-level money, which one of your original work would you like to see adapted for screen?
Well, The Man Who Folded Himself would make a hell of a movie.
Hell yeah.
I think The War Against the Tor, my series, would make a great Game of Thrones scale television series. But I also have to say I have this Jumping Off the Planet trilogy. It's kind of an homage to Heinlein Juveniles, which would work very, very well because it's a family story. I noticed after I adopted my son, I was writing more stories about families than, so excuse me, where's my Pokeball? Because I gotta grab that one. There's a Pikachu at the back of the room. Yes? Pardon? I was house sitting for Donald Westlake out in Culver Lake, New Jersey. And I was working on The War Against the Tor, and my agent called and said, I just sold The Man Who Folded Himself to, I'd written half of The Man Who Folded Himself, and I got into a scene that I didn't know how to handle. So then my agent called and said, I just sold The Man Who Folded Himself to Random. I said, shit, now I gotta finish the book. And it was I didn't know where to go, and I would, you know, argue with myself, and I'd go and write 3 pages. And then I would get stuck again, and the next day I'd write 3 more pages, and then I'd get stuck again, and then I would write 3 more pages, and that was how I finally finished that book. I was getting stuck every day, and I'd have to stop and do something else, and then sleep on it, and then the next day, well, I could do that. Okay, let's see what happens, and I just I wrote myself into about 17 corners in a row. So, yeah, but somehow I got...
If there was ever a country song about writers, it should be called 3 Pages at a Time or something. I don't know. That's bizarre.
I have no idea what, you know, fans are welcome to read into anything what they want. I mean, I wrote a story called Dancer in the Dark, and I've seen 17 different interpretations of the metaphor. So I don't even know what the metaphor is anymore.
That's how you know it's art, David.
It's art.
Yes, that's how it's art, because 17 different interpretations.
But it was a Sturgeon Award nominee, so I guess I got, you know, the story worked. So, and the funny thing is, I've been a Sturgeon Award nominee twice. Now, I knew Ted Sturgeon really well, and the two stories that were nominated were the most Sturgeon-like stories I've ever written, and of all the nominees, I felt they were the most Sturgeon-like, but I didn't win either time. So I'm not an award junkie, because I have a somewhat jaundiced attitude about the way, you know, it's like, what makes one story better than another? It's the impact you have on the reader, and that's subjective, not objective. So why do we have this winner and loser thing? It doesn't work for me. So, I mean, you know, I came in, missed getting a Hugo for the Trouble with Tribbles script by 3 votes, and there's a story behind how those 3 votes got moved around. So, do I care? No. It's really, it's like, it's just one more thing to dust. So, where are we at a time?
No, you can take 3 more minutes.
Oh, okay.
I was just saying, illegal aliens.
Yeah, illegal aliens. Well, no, this was illegal con committee.
The Electoral College of,
Yeah, it was the Electoral College.
Oh, it was WorldCon, not the
Yeah, they've changed the voting rules in the last 50 years, so it's a lot harder to screw around with them. Who else has a question?
There was one in the back.
Someone in the
Yes.
back? Yes.
Do you have a favorite scene that you wrote in the Tribbles episode?
Oh yeah, it is Scotty. Who started the fight? Captain. Who threw the first punch, Scotty? I did. and it's just such a wonderful bit of relationship. And in fact, Bob Justman wrote a memo saying he thought that scene was the best scene ever for demonstrating the relationship between Kirk and Scotty, and that was high praise indeed coming from Bob Justman. So
and Jimmy Doohan didn't get those kind of scenes himself.
He didn't
very often.
Yeah, Jimmy was a good guy, very interesting man, and it was a pleasure. I wanted to write a scene for every actor. I wanted to have some fun. So there's a Chekhov scene, and an Uhura scene, and a Scotty scene, and a McCoy scene. And I actually downplayed Spock because I had seen so many episodes and so many scripts that were about Spock that I wanted to find out who all the other characters were. And I have apologized to Leonard Nimoy. I said, you know, I'm sorry I didn't give Spock more to do. He says, but you must admit, I do follow Bill around very well. And, you know, I have to say, Leonard Nimoy I'm sorry he's no longer with us, God, he was great. He was not only a great guy in front of the camera, but behind the camera, not even working, he was a warm, gentle, compassionate, intelligent, wonderful, wonderful man in every regard. And I could not ever want to say a bad word about him. I can't imagine saying a bad word about Leonard Nimoy.
I was going to say, including the quiet times, he was a warrior for different causes and different people, including the rest of the cast.
Absolutely. Yeah. He understood that it was a partnership better than anybody. And you know, we all loved him. There's just no question. He was just one of the most loved guys. So, one more question, and then I'll be done. Who's got? Make it a good one. Not too hard. Yes, way in the back. Oh no, you're waving at someone.
Okay.
Anyone? All right.
But before we go, you're upstairs.
I'm in the dealer's room, yes, and I have books and tribbles and scripts for sale. And if there's questions you have or you just want to chat, please come up and see me. Because I get lonely sitting there alone. All I have to do is write a book, and I can do that. I can do that when I get home. So please come on.
I'm going to stick around so I can sit this. Hold on. But when the weekend is over, David, the website. What's the best way to find you online? I'm going into podcast hosting.
Find me on Facebook. I'll get it out. Don't help. Find me on Facebook. I'm there almost every day. But you can also find my writing on Patreon.com. And there's a lot of free stuff, but if you subscribe, you get some of the goodies. So Patreon and Facebook. What is wrong with my mouth today? Patreon and Facebook.
There we go. That is a proper goodbye. And this is a proper goodbye. Thank you so much, David.